How are you? How's everyone doing? Let's start with the news about what's happening around the world. There are reports of images showing alleged missiles being launched this time. Well, it's an Iranian missile heading toward a United States airbase in Kuwait. According to what these images show, it appears to be a ballistic missile launched from Iran itself. But like everything in a conflict, this is information that we have to say is supposedly happening, right? No, supposedly this is happening, but we'll have to wait for more details. But since yesterday, attacks on Kuwait have been reported. Kuwait itself confirmed this yesterday. Now these images can also be seen. The IDF are reportedly attacking infrastructure in Tyre. It's supposedly Hezbollah infrastructure in one of the oldest cities in Lebanon. They claim that this site is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with 3,000 years of history. That city is currently under bombardment. There are also reports about this ship, which is believed to be near Turkey. By the way, naval drones attacked 3 oil tankers from the Shadow Fleet linked to Russia. The attack occurred about 3 kilometers off the Turkish coast. According to what is known, the lower part of the ship was reportedly damaged. This was due to some apparently Ukrainian drones. It also draws attention. This was given by the IDF, in which the IDF itself shows how they were trying to sabotage a dam, the largest dam in Lebanon, called Lake Araun, along with the Litani River. According to reports, Hezbollah was about to sabotage the dam, and they were reportedly attacked by the IDF. According to reports, they also show this image, which we only see for a few seconds. Let's take a look. At that moment, these individuals, a group of people, as we saw a moment ago, a group of people from, it's not exactly known which group, but armed individuals would be shooting at the Basij, at the internal intelligence and security forces that they have over there in Iran, which is really a kind of repressive force called the Basij. And now, well, unknown armed people is chasing them. So be careful with that issue too, because apparently the people themselves are taking control or trying to take control of Iran, a topic that is drawing a lot of attention today. There's also, well, this very curious image showing Russia and Afghanistan apparently signing an agreement on military and technical cooperation. It's also good. It's incredible. The move Russia is making in that sense with the Taliban themselves. Russia has already experienced situations of extremism, let's say extremism and jihadism and all that. And now it's starting to have or even establish military relations with these kinds of regimes. The truth is that it's a tremendous issue, but it's also seen as a kind of desperation due to Russia's lack of alliances. Another issue that draws attention, which we saw a few moments ago in a short clip that I showed you earlier, it's the image that's drawing attention today, where several satellite images have been published claiming that the reconstruction of Iran is already in its final phase. In other words, the reconstruction of missile launchers would already be in their final phase and ready, well, for a new phase of the conflict. This message from the Prime Minister also draws attention from Sweden, in which he says the following. Let's listen to a bit of what he says.
To react, I think it's quite obvious that Russia we know quite well.
Well, there it's dubbed. But the Russian says, we know very well what Russia thinks about the countries that help Ukraine. All the countries in the region are well prepared for various scenarios and hybrid threats, so this doesn't change anything. That's how the head of the Swedish government responded when asked if he feared a reaction from Russia to the delivery of fighter jets to Ukraine. That's good, because that's how red lines are handled, right? In a clear and concise way. Well, yes, of course, there are risks, but we are prepared for them. Basically something else that stands out in today's images. This moment when over in Argentina, they were trying to break a record for a super sandwich, a huge sandwich, something enormous like that. But suddenly people got hungry and one person got the idea and then another. And before they could measure the 750-meter sandwich, 750 meters. Someone broke the order, let's say. And everyone started rushing in and grabbing pieces of the sandwich. Clearly, the record couldn't be set. A gastronomic event in Argentina that was aiming to set the new world record for the largest sandwich in the world has simply been cancelled. Sure. And well, that's how it is. Obviously, the situation went viral and now a lot of memes are coming out of it. A huge greeting to the entire Argentine community, to everyone watching us out there. And well, that's the topic. A big greeting as well to the community watching us in California. Jose Zarate, how have you been? Perla, how are you? Hello to everyone joining us. Gabriel Edilcia, Gas Duro, Eric, how have you been? Hey, let's get to the news about what's happening in the world. Check this out. No. 4 attacks have been reported. This time, Iran fired at ships, and at least 4 ships were reportedly fired upon. They allegedly opened fire, supposedly warning shots, but it's claimed that some of these ships had actually fired to hit them. According to what Iranian state television IDSIF says, the ships ignored multiple security warnings before being fired upon by the Iranian forces, one deployed in the maritime area of that region of the world. Look, if we quickly go to the Strait of Hormuz, right, and we go to this area, it's supposedly an attempt by 4 ships to pass through this strait. Since they didn't have the permission or approval of the Iranians, well, they decided to open fire, according to reports. This maritime passage is no longer just any route, let's say just a regular passage, but rather it's a route that the Iranians want to establish. An area they basically claim as their own, where they can charge, make up any excuse just to prevent passage through the area. At the same time, the United States was mentioning that there was already a negotiation, that not only was there a negotiation, Axios was reporting it as a scoop, right? It said, quoting United States officials from Trump's inner circle, a 60-day memorandum of understanding has already been agreed upon by the negotiating teams from the United States and Iran, and the United States is currently awaiting approval. So, Donald Trump and the regime are already talking. They're already in agreement, right? And it turns out that yes, in fact, they are in agreement, in quotes, with the political wing. What happened next? Minutes later? This is already happening. The Iranians are already involved. They really like doing that now, right? Pretending like I'm not the political wing, I'm the military wing. I don't agree. And they do it every 15 days, every 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They make some kind of agreement, negotiate, and then say, no, but you negotiated with the wrong person. It was supposed to be with me. And then they go and do it all over. They say, no, now you can negotiate with him, and negotiate again. And they say, man, buddy, what I told you wasn't with me. It was with the other guy. And that's how they keep them on their toes. But now that Donald Trump, and because information was already starting to circulate, not just from his officials, and word was already spreading that the official announcement of the supposed memorandum was coming, which is basically a pause in the conflict for 60 days. Immediately after, the Iranians come out to say that Iran is rejecting the Axios report that claimed an agreement had been reached between the United States and Iran. According to negotiating sources, Iran called the report fake news and said it will not sign any agreement that does not align with its interests. So there's another issue. It is also reported that Mojtaba Khamenei did not approve the terms of the agreement, so all of this is cancelled. You will see and you will be hearing about it. It's that they already reached an agreement. Agreements that they already reached an agreement. Well, not only did this not happen, but it's far from happening, at least for now. Pay attention to this issue, because it would be strange for them to reach an agreement while they're literally shooting at each other daily. I mean, there were attacks yesterday and the day before as well. Today, there will be attacks on these ships. I mean, we know it looks like it's escalating. But at the same time, supposedly, dialogue is taking place. And now the Iranians say no, that there isn't even an agreement and that Moshtaba simply isn't even on board. He's not happy with the agreements. I mean, with the attempt at an agreement. I mean, he didn't like the proposal. Check this out. Check out this fact. Look, more and more information is being declassified about what's going on with, well, documents that were hidden for decades, that were stored away, and, well, even though the documents existed, it was said that there were no strange phenomena, that absolutely nothing was happening, that there was nothing to hide. But over time, they realized there was information, and now a researcher named Dr. Harf Puthoff reportedly continued to report several very interesting details about non-human biological remains of entities, let's say humanoid, but not human. And what does this doctor claim? Yeah, he was involved in a project that was reportedly funded by the CIA. He publicly claims that the United States reportedly has biological remains, which he was able to confirm from at least 4 different types of beings. According to the statement, which doesn't come from lower or unknown circles, but rather from a person who is very well known and has been connected to the CIA. This Dr. Puthoff, whom we've already mentioned several times here, and who now suddenly, in this era of information, in this era of a kind of revelation, of mysteries, let's say, of declassification, so to speak, according to what he claims and confirms, these species would be considered remains that aren't necessarily here, he says, but they could be. He says the so-called greys are the most well-known in UFO culture, and this researcher insists that he could have witnessed this situation. Also, the researcher Eric Davis, a collaborator of this doctor, previously stated that some of these bodies had already been recovered in incidents that the same research and intelligence agencies were monitoring. And well, they were the ones in charge of documenting and certifying all these cases only internally, and it was never made public. Also, David Roche, the former military intelligence officer. By the way, from the United States, David Roche testified under oath before the United States Congress that the government possessed non-human biological material, but he also admitted that at least he did not get to see it directly. He held an intelligence position and received the reports, and he would see them and read them, but that was it. He couldn't go and check every single thing himself, right? So he says that it really caught his attention when he came across those documents about non-human biological remains. So if it were just a single case involving an unknown person, but someone of a very low level, let's say within intelligence circles, then it wouldn't mean anything. But David Roche had a good position. The same goes for Louis Leeson and also Dr. Pothoff, right? Well, these are people with a certain level of importance and knowledge about these topics. So, keep in mind that this doesn't mean we have to believe everything these people say, but at least their testimonies should show us that there's something they're not telling us, something that has been hidden for a long time. So if what these people are saying is true, it obviously needs to be investigated. And also the fact that what they are claiming becomes known, more people are going to start coming forward. Because to carry out this kind of investigation, a lot of people must have been involved. And I wouldn't doubt at all that more information will be leaked. Not just the official information, but let's say from former agents, there will be plenty of leakers. You'll see, there will be a lot of leaks on that. Pay attention to this and see what's happening with the topic. In other important matters, a warning is being issued for the next 5 years. That is from now, from this year, 2026 to the coming years. It would be one of the toughest predictions ever made in meteorology. the United Kingdom's Meteorological Office released a kind of meta-analysis, a warning that is causing alarm on a global level. Why on a global level? Well, because it literally affects all of us. According to historical temperature records, not only will 2026 break records because of the Super El Niño, but they estimate, and this is based on information patterns, based on what has happened in recent years, and on the global scientific consensus in meteorology. They come to the conclusion that the next 5 years, that is 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, and 2030, each of those years will set historic temperature records. Right. The report indicates that there is an 86% chance that records will be broken from 2026 onward in the coming years. Son ese ratosteno retorno. Global temperatures could be between 1.3 and 1.9 degrees above pre-industrial levels, approaching scenarios considered to be points of no return. London, for example, the British capital, is known for its mild, rainy, and at times even chilly climate. But now temperatures can even reach nearly 40 degrees, and even 35 degrees is a lot for them. Researchers detected an abnormal accumulation of warm waters in the Pacific, a sign not of an El Niño, but of a Super El Niño. John Hammerson warned that this phenomenon could take hold during this period. Right now, from the beginning of summer to early fall, at that point, although they warn, and we've mentioned it here as well, there aren't other meteorological agencies, let's say. What they say is that they believe the phenomenon will start in the coming weeks, but they don't take it for granted because the phenomenon is practically already here. Sea temperatures are going to be more than 3 degrees above average, which is a lot, 3 degrees above average. The Arctic, for example, will be one of the most affected areas, where winters are expected to be 2.8 degrees warmer, accelerating the melting and causing changes. What does it affect? Well, it affects the ocean currents and changes the ocean currents, and it creates an effect that impacts the climate for several years. What happens with the melting? It's freshwater melt, and the fresh water reaches the sea, breaking the balance of minerals in the ocean, and then the currents start to work differently. They slow down. So the AMOC, which is a key current for the world that we've already mentioned several times, is a current in the Atlantic with warm water rising and cold water sinking, right? So with those temperature changes, there are balances that make life possible in many parts of North America, but it also makes it possible elsewhere. And in Europe, by the way, it also makes that balance possible, so that there isn't an excess of heat toward the central part of the Atlantic. Because without that cold current coming from the north, well, the potential for more hurricanes and tremendous phenomena would be much greater. Well, that's what could happen, right? This melting that's going to speed up from this year to the next 5 years. I mean, it's going to keep accelerating year after year. No, it's not that this will happen in 5 years. It's already happening now. Although temporarily exceeding the 1.5 limit doesn't automatically mean breaking the Paris Agreement. Scientists warn that the world's safety margin has quickly decreased for this year. The report was well prepared, just to clarify, because as I was saying, this is a meta-analysis. It's not the analysis of a single meteorologist, it's a meta-analysis. Look at those who participated. The report was prepared by 13 international scientific institutes and represents one of the strongest climate warnings issued so far. Participating in it, as the one who compiled all the information, is the Met Office from the United Kingdom and the WMO, which is the World Meteorological Organization, which is part of the UN. And who participates? All the most important meteorologists from each country, universities, and so on, send their information, and then they come up with their results based on all that data, right? So it's no small matter. Let's take this matter into account, especially because we need to plan, right? We need to be prepared. We need to pay attention to how things are developing and start understanding these kinds of situations. Yes. Going back to geopolitics, the United States accuses Iran of breaking the ceasefire by launching a missile at Kuwait, but they also detected 5 drones heading toward the Strait of Hormuz. The military authorities reported that they were able to confirm what was initially shown to them as a kind of missile that was launched. There it is. The US military authorities reported that this ballistic missile was intercepted by Kuwaiti forces, and that 5 drones headed toward maritime areas were also stopped by American troops and their own allies. The Central Command, the famous CENTCOM, also gave its report. CENTCOM made the accusation. It's the United States Central Command, which is the one the Pentagon operates, let's say, in the Middle East. It accused Iran of breaking the ceasefire and launching a ballistic missile at Kuwait and sending 5 attack drones toward the Strait of Hormuz. That too. Well, that's intense, isn't it? The Kuwaiti forces successfully intercepted this missile aimed at their territory. The offensive is already being described as a blatant violation of the ceasefire, and everything points to a breakdown. That's why I tell you that this whole negotiation thing is honestly hard to believe, isn't it? Meanwhile, there is also more information about the situation currently happening inside Lebanon and Israel, right? There, you can start to see Israeli military artillery units that are in Lebanon after crossing the border between Israel and Lebanon. And, well, according to reports, they announced late yesterday the start of what they call a new offensive. We managed to mention it to you briefly one night. But they say that the attacks on Lebanon are happening in a very intense way. A few hours ago, we showed you these explosions that happened in the city of Tyre. And the situation is very serious because, after all, it's a city full of civilians, right? And full of history, isn't it? So because of a radical group and a very tough stance from Israel, a terrible situation is unfolding, right? In which they say there are other ways to deal with that radical group Hezbollah, and not in such a harsh, invasive, and let's say destructive way, right? Also, well, according to reports, today they issued a new evacuation order for residents of some areas of Tyre, when announcing they had to take strong measures against Hezbollah. According to the statement later released via social media, earlier on Wednesday, the Israeli army declared the entire south of Lebanon a combat zone up to the river Litani, a strip that covers approximately almost 20%, about 18% of Lebanon's territory, is under fire or under attack by Israel, right? So it's also a very tough issue. Hey, well, changing the subject, Japan and the Philippines have managed to create their own kind of NATO, so to speak. They are going to expand their security cooperation, including defense and military matters. They say this is in response to the growing threat from China. The authorities of both countries announced new measures in which they aim to exchange intelligence and classified information. This is Takahashi, the Prime Minister. The Japanese Prime Minister is there, and also the Filipino President, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. They shook hands at a very important meeting. Today, May 28, 2026, this historic moment is happening, where 2 Asian countries, one like the Philippines, which has invested a lot in military matters for decades and has had a close relationship with the United States, and the same goes for Japan. So, it was kind of logical that this kind of rapprochement would happen in parallel. The Filipino president also said that Japanese companies committed to investing $3.4 billion in the Philippines during a high-level roundtable with major conglomerates. The visit also coincides with the 70th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations between these countries. Since we're in Asia, let me tell you something else. We know, because it's reported that Taiwan's Lai Ching-te, right? The Taiwanese president has made some very strong statements saying that if they lay down their arms, there would be no Taiwan. Taiwan is once again facing a phase without much challenge, where Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are talking, and Taiwan is somewhat sidelined. That's why Taiwan's reaction is to say, hey, we're going to arm ourselves and get ready to prevent an invasion from China, right? Let's move on. Let's go to other important matters as well. Check this out. There's a report presented to the UN that reveals how Gaesa, this conglomerate, is responsible. The report claims it's a pretty comprehensive report. It's responsible for hunger in Cuba. The Food Monitor Program reported to the United Nations Special Rapporteur that the island's food crisis is due to the business administration group Ese Gaesa. The observatory presented all the information to the rapporteur, the details of how the food crisis in Cuba has deepened by exercising a monopoly over foreign currency, imports, and food distribution chains under the command of the Revolutionary Armed Forces, the FARC. The document addressed to the United Nations rapporteur in the context of the call. They claim that, let's say, the move they've made is a kind of administrative capitalism model that operates in Venezuela. Report of the UN Revolutionary Force, Revolutionary Cuba, Revolutionary Nation, the nation. Through that leadership, let's say they have a kind of monopoly over everything related to food and also public finances and all those kinds of things. So they control everything. 96% of Cubans have lost the ability to purchase food in recent years. That's according to their 2024 National Food Security Survey. Also states that Gaesa would be, let's say, basically unable. There's no way they can solve the problem soon. It's more like things got out of their control. Cuba imports 80% of the food it consumes, and that makes things extremely complicated. Just imagine 80%, right? Especially if you're not a country that generates wealth. Singapore brings in or imports food. They import about 95% of their food. But the thing is, they produce a lot. They generate a lot of wealth. And they have partnerships with 90-something countries, over 90 countries. So they get everything from everywhere, right? I mean, beans, corn, whatever, right? Whatever you want, you're going to get it not from just one country, but from many. So that gives them risk diversification. But you have to have something to pay with, right? You have to have something to sustain what you're doing, right? Singapore is very interesting because it's a city-state, right? They don't have land to farm. There's no space to plant. So they have to adapt in a different way, right? How? Well, first by prospering, right? That's also important, right? Let's move on to other interesting matters about what's happening in the world. Notice that 3 oil tankers and gas carriers are leaving Hormuz with their transponders turned off. What does this mean? I mean, first of all, it means there are movements. Let's take a look. Let's go to the map. There are movements in this area where, well, they're not just trying, let's say this, well, not just to avoid being discovered, so to speak, but also because ships heading to India are already starting to pass or trying to pass through here. 2 supertankers and an LNG carrier left the Strait of Hormuz, and well, it's known that they turn off their transponders and head to India or China. According to Kepler's maritime transport data, which of course, I mean, isn't surprising either. These are movements that were expected, but in the end, it's a lot of oil that's leaving. Finally, let's say, and this has caused prices to stay a little bit lower. Even though prices have shot up and things like that have happened, As long as the oil tankers or supertankers keep leaving, even if it's sporadically, what happens when China or India buy oil directly from these ships? Well, they don't need to look elsewhere anymore, right? They don't have to look elsewhere, which reduces price pressure, right? So, well, that's also important. Let's move on to other interesting matters. Look at what's happening with Besant. The US Secretary of the Treasury just sent an important message. Check this out. Would be aiming to sanction or even go further with the Iranian airlines. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the United States will suspend Iranian airlines' access to landing and refueling locations without clarifying how he intends to enforce the measure, because they want to apply it globally. So they want Iranian airlines not to operate anywhere in the world, or at least in as few places as possible, right? What's going on? So no one knows how he intends to put pressure, but he says today that they are going to suspend Iranian airlines' access to landing and refueling locations. It states that Washington is going to cut off access for 2 Iranian airlines, which are the ones with the biggest global footprint, Global, so that they can't be sold fuel, nor can they sell plane tickets through the global systems. Basically, another issue that also draws attention in the whole Iran situation is Strait of Hormuz. The United States, they say, is close to having a different proposal, supposedly regarding the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen this story too many times already. Haven't they told us that so many times that it's not believable anymore, right? I mean, they're always saying they're going to negotiate, that they already have the framework, that they have the memorandum or whatever they want to call it, right? Well, that's the reality. Well, it's the same points on one side, the same points on the other. There's no chance for an agreement, right? I mean, there's just no way. At least not right now. I insist. I mean, this is going to be more about war or pressure, not about pressure between them, right? But if one side can't reach an agreement and the other can't either, and both are caught up in a problem where they won't even allow free navigation, well, sooner or later, someone is going to get tired. Sooner or later, someone is going to make a mistake. And by mistake, I mean that they might attack an area too much and things start to get worse, right? On the other hand, let me talk about what's happening in other areas, also on other important topics. Look, check this out. Notice that Russia is claiming that the deployment of US forces to Poland means a qualitative escalation, according to what they say about the deployment of additional US military forces to Poland. It's really strange that they hadn't reacted before. It forces Moscow to take retaliatory measures, said today the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, the Kremlin spokesperson, because she says they are going to retaliate. I mean, yes, this really catches my attention, right? Zakharova even posted it on her own Twitter account, didn't she? And well, in response to this, there are also reactions from the Minister of Foreign Affairs from here. Well, not from here, from over there, from Europe, right? I mean, Kaja Kallas says that Russia wants us to discuss who talks to them, and they're already choosing who is suitable for that. Let's not fall into that trap. Negotiations are always a team effort with a defined strategy. That's why the content we're discussing today in Cyprus matters much more. My statements to the press before today's meeting with the foreign ministers of the European Union. And look, the statements are as follows. Let's listen here and hear to them.
The Middle East situation and how does it impact us and how we can cooperate together on these issues. Then we will also discuss our core interests regarding Russia in the peace negotiations. There's not much happening right now, and we also see on the battlefield that Russia is on the back foot there. So that's why it's really the place to discuss with the foreign minister. It is.
The European Union's Foreign Affairs chief says that pressure must be applied and to seek a dialogue, to try to meet, to see each other face to face, both Ukraine and Russia. And well, it's necessary, right? That at some point a dialogue takes place as part of a series of comments she has been making even regarding the Middle East issue. No, she has been very active. Kaja Kallas, right? In that sense, well, she's someone who was known, who was going, well, to do a good job as a representative, let's say, of other foreign relations, especially considering that she was already very public. I mean, before all of this, she was very public in everything she did. Well, everything she saw as wrong, let's say, right? Especially when it came to international issues. Today, the United States is shifting its approach to another Middle Eastern country. Look at what's happening now. The United States would be threatening, issuing, let's say, well, an ultimatum, a warning, but not to Iran, but to Oman. Just look to a country that until just a few months ago was in charge. It was the neutral country you could talk to about the Gaza issue and also about the Iran issue. In the first term, of Trump's first year of his second term, right? I mean, last year in June. Do you remember that the meeting was going to be held in Oman? Well, the United States warns that it will aggressively attack Oman if it facilitates the collection of tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. A moment ago, I gave you a little preview, but there weren't so many details about how this comment from the United States came about. But look, if we observe the Strait of Hormuz, the strait is practically divided in two, which is this part belonging to Oman and this part belonging to Iran. So, when passing through here, the division of the toll or the fee they want to charge is going to be between the two. So Oman started warming to the idea of not agreeing at first, but then began to think, well, getting a little extra money isn't so bad. So in that sense, it's just a little environmental fee and they make up whatever reasons they want, like for safety or whatever, right? The United States government says it will not tolerate any effort to impose a toll system in the Strait of Hormuz. He says it. Scott Bessent himself, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, says this comes after the US president warned that he would blow up Oman if it agreed to collaborate with Iran. So that was Donald Trump's warning that they'll be blown up if they start negotiating and trying to charge tolls to ships. Well, that's also, well, really interesting. Today, there's also another report that I think is key to understanding where armed conflicts are heading in the world right now, right? Specifically in the Middle East. If we look at Israel, there's currently a movement against Gaza. It was said that they wanted 50% of Gaza to control them and thus be able to put more pressure on Hamas. But this time, this agreement changes, because in the end, that was an agreement in which the United States also participated. But they've thrown it overboard because now Netanyahu himself makes a decision without consulting, obviously, with his partners. And now he says he's going to take not 50 but 70% of the Gaza Strip. In other words, those agreements are broken, and because of this, there's also pressure on Trump in that regard. The Israeli Prime Minister declared today, Thursday, the 22nd of May, that he had ordered the country's army to take control of 70% of the Gaza Strip, defying the terms of a ceasefire that was already very fragile, right? Well, that ceasefire with Hamas is possibly also on the verge of collapsing, of disappearing, right? That ceasefire, no. And where does it say that? It says so on Israel's Channel 12, right? And that's where this report comes from. So what happens? I mean, where is it? You might think that apparently things are a little less bad, and suddenly it gets complicated again. So, well, keep an eye on that issue too, because there's concern that this could escalate again to very serious levels of war, right? Let's move on to other important points as well. Let's start with some comments. I'm reading them here. Thank you very much. Let's go with that. How have you been, Perla? We'll get to other important matters in a moment. I appreciate it if you can help us by sharing, giving likes. That is greatly appreciated. Here's a comment from Panterita Ukraine. It says, if all of them run out of weapons, they have to ask for more somewhere else. It says Ukraine. Yes, greetings. How have you been? I mean, it's complicated, and that's why Ukraine is starting to make its own weapons, right? Incredible. Greetings. Hello, he says, land thieves and genocidal people, he says, and people applaud them, says Verderi. Say hi, Verderi. How have you been? Lately, there are a lot of topics, right? So 3-3, a lot of topics, right? It's like the topic that has interested you the most. You're taking greetings, right? It says the goal is to take as much territory as possible in Gaza or Lebanon, the Gulf countries. And they say it's not because they want greater Israel. No one believes them anymore, says Perla. How are you, Perla? Greetings, says Gas Gas Duro. How are you, Gas Gas Duro? Greetings, hello. Says, okay. How are you, Francisco Arce? Hello there. Gas Duro, big greetings to Blanca Barceló. How have you been? Hello there. Who is it? Who's passing by here? Let me close. They say and talk in reality, actually internal groups and Iranians or those introduced as such. No. I do think they are. I mean, obviously, potentially, or supported, and they could be Kurds, they could be opposition groups, and it's not like you just suddenly go out overnight, bring me weapons, and start shooting like that. I mean, you have to have training and a certain level of cold-bloodedness to do those things. So I think they must be people, or if they're insiders, then with advice or support from the United States or Israel or both, they could be Kurds. We must also remember their issue with the Kurds. Yeah, and it could be insiders too, right? You can't rule that out given what's happening internally. It's really bad. Above all, I imagine there must be a lot of discontent among all the parents and all the people who lost their relatives in the attacks they've been carrying out against the population, right? It's not the first time we've seen how the Basij themselves are persecuted or attacked, those same Basij. They're a security force, a force of repression, right? In fact, right now, they're not in any of their facilities. They're not there. No, they can't be there. So it's said that they're in hiding. Previously, the Basij had no building, correct? Well, to begin with, they were bombed. But then, where do they go to live? Well, to houses and things like that. Secret places. And when they're discovered, the population puts pressure on them. The population and probably intelligence and things like that from other countries. No, I don't doubt it. But good point, Blanca. Greetings to Amanda. How have you been? Very good. Greetings, Adilson. How have you been? Big greetings to you too. Thank you very much. This is Adrian Gilbert. How have you been, Antonio? How's it going? Very good, says Bien Yuka. Pepe asks, what's this about? What topic? Which one? Jose says, Dante, how are you? Very good. He says, greetings, cheers, Pepe. And this one says from Tarragona, Spain, with all the Roman spirit here. Congratulations on the show. Thank you very much. What does with all the Roman spirit mean? How have you been? Was that true? That was a big greeting. Very nice. Pepe says, who could stop Israel? He says they're very aggressive. And you see that even people bringing humanitarian aid have been attacked by them. That's serious. What do you think? First point. You can't be blocking journalists who want to enter Gaza. You can't do that. Because from the start, that's already suspicious. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's very suspicious. And then suddenly they say, no, you can't come in. I mean, you say, huh? Why not? What's being hidden there, right? There has to be journalism, because if not, then either the narrative gets blocked or the narrative also becomes more extreme, right? Because what are you going to have? What kind of information are you going to get? Well, you're only going to get information from those who are part of the radical groups in Gaza, right? We also have to acknowledge there are radical groups too, right? Definitely. So no, I mean, you should let the press circulate and let conclusions be drawn and let what's happening there be analyzed critically, right? But that attitude Well, that autocratic attitude that Netanyahu has, he's a person who more and more, I see Erdogan and this Netanyahu moving more and more toward a position of basically absolute control within their country, right? That's what they're after. There's no longer any real opposition, at least right now. And when there is, it always ends up collapsing one way or another, right? So these figures have been very clever in holding on to power through one crisis after another, and even wars and all sorts of things, right? It's pretty intense, isn't it? And not because of, well, obviously, as you would expect, right? But suddenly you remember. Not because of seeing the wrongdoings of someone like Netanyahu, right? That's not why you won't criticize what Netanyahu does or what the radical groups do there, because that's also terrible, right? Obviously, these are situations that always need to be analyzed, right? Greetings. How are you, Adrian Gilbert Leonardo? Leonardo Perez says, for me, the strategy they're using isn't effective and it needs to be reviewed to try to affect the civilian population as little as possible. He says exactly, right from the start. This can't be done like this. No, you can't do it this way because then you get into a state of absolute dehumanization, right? In which maybe, well, you can't wipe out that whole society just because you're going after this group, right? That's not, okay, is it? I think that in that sense, a good part of the world agrees that no, it can't be like that, because in that case, any problem would mean, well, just wipe the city off the map, wipe it off the map. This country, it's really intense, definitely. Let's go. Let's move on to other points, to other topics that are also important. But precisely speaking of this, the attacks inside Lebanon are intensifying, with the Israel Defense Forces reportedly attacking in Beirut. Look, it had already been a few weeks without any significant attacks in Beirut. There were warnings that they were going to hit hard, but in the end, nothing happened. The attacks have mainly been in the southern part, that is, let's say, close to the border with Israel, right? Basically, right? That's where the attacks have been, mainly in that area. But remember that weeks and months ago, there were also tremendous attacks here. Well, according to reports, the Israel Defense Forces announced that today, they also carried out attacks in a suburb of Beirut. 3 weeks had passed without attacks in the area, and now they have returned. Images and videos from the suburb of Shuaifat reportedly showed a dense column of white smoke rising from different residential areas. The area was near Beirut International Airport. Well, another attack also happened in that region. And, well, that's how things stand on that matter as well. Well, later on, we'll be analyzing other reports, other situations. But I wanted to tell you this. There's a matter in the United Kingdom that catches my attention, which is a topic that was talked about a lot here in Mexico at the time, which was the issue of NEETs, right? You know, the classic not studying or working, right? According to reports, the number of young people between 16 and 24 years old in the United Kingdom who are neither studying nor working. Yes, it's already reaching over 1 million people. Yes. The number of young people between 16 and 24 years old in the United Kingdom who are not studying, not working, and not receiving training has reached 1,012,000 people. In the first quarter of 2026, 1,012,000 people. As far as we know, that's only counting those between 16 and 24 years old. That's the calculation, right? The number of NEETs in the United Kingdom is one of the highest they have ever had in that country. It's an increase from one year to the next of 89,000 more young people who are in that category, let's say, right? According to what they say, they are studying ways to try to help them become productive, so to speak, right? According to what they report, the group, it is estimated that 13.5% of all people between 16 and 24 years old in the United Kingdom are not studying, not working, and not receiving any kind of training, which implies that more people are ending up in a situation that obviously puts a burden on the country. It is estimated that 14.4% of young men were in that category, an increase of 1.2 percentage points according to reports. And look, this is not a problem unique to just Mexico or the United Kingdom. There are several countries that are, well, figuring out what they're going to do, right? With all these people who either didn't find an opportunity to study or they did and didn't want to use it, whatever the reason, right? But they say there's a risk of having a lost generation. The announcement of the data from the United Kingdom's Office for National Statistics comes at a time when the possibility of a lost generation is now more likely than ever. A lost generation of people between 16 and 24 years old who are not studying, not working. And according to them, this is increasing. I mean, in the United Kingdom. No, but how many countries might be in the same situation? The former Minister of Health of the country talks about this situation and about the job and education market with young people. The document warns that the United Kingdom may be facing what they call a generational gap. It is a generation that they insist could be lost in that sense. They claim that almost 60% neither study nor work. They are economically inactive. Not only are they unemployed, but they are not even looking for work. In other words, most of them, notice, 60%, aren't even looking for it. So they flat out say that this is obviously alarming, that 6 out of 10 young people who neither study nor work aren't looking for opportunities. They also say there's a risk of having a lost generation. Is this what the Minister of Labour is saying? Well, I think so. It's obviously a worrying issue, isn't it? Obviously, it's important and it causes you all kinds of problems. You know, the problem isn't just economic. It can cause you other problems as well. I mean, in the end, if you're just wandering around with nothing to do, like they say, you're just idle, right? Well, that's when it starts. That's when I say that sometimes great ideas suddenly come up too, right? In those moments of nothingness. But also, well, the troubles and the problems, right? He says we can't complain about the labor shortage. He talks about low growth and the increase in social welfare costs and the pressure on public services, while we allow the talent of almost 1 million young people to go to waste. So, yeah, it's not that there's a lack of manpower, it's something else that's missing. So how do we find opportunities for these people? How do we motivate them, right? So that they actually start working or at least studying or something, right? Well, that's how things are. Great. Well, I'm still here reading comments. This report about the young people caught my attention, you know, about young people who neither study nor work, right? This one, because I remember that here, well, it's talked about a lot. It's been talked about for years, right? Who knows what percentage we have here in Mexico? We'd have to check that, right? Let's see what INEGI says, right? On that topic, it says there are a lot of young people who neither study nor work in Mexico and the government supports them. It says it gets involved. It gets involved. When people say the government supports them, it's just a saying, right? It doesn't really support them. And what it gives is nothing, right? I mean, it's really not the case. It's very little. Honestly, very little. It's not enough to support them. But let's say they do get some kind of support or something like that, right? There are countries that really do support people. I mean, they give you enough to eat, to live, for everything, right? Right? Here, well, the support is really minimal. But how many could there be, right? Because then a lot of them are here doing informal work. Right? So sometimes it might seem like, well, we'd have to see what the real number is, right? Of, well, that kind of crowd, right? He greets me and asks, how have you been, right? This one says, if Hezbollah existed or if it didn't exist, who would stop Israel from taking all of Lebanon? Because they're considered terrorists, but if they didn't exist, Israel would take everything, says Perla. Well, that's Perla's theory, right? I mean, the thing is that Hezbollah doesn't just attack Israel. They attack everyone who isn't like them. You see? Remember how they entered, let's say, the government of Lebanon by killing people, kidnapping people from Lebanon. Their first decision was to take power from there. So it's not that they stop Israel. It's that what they want to do is expand. I mean, here we're talking about Iran expanding. It's not even a group that represents the interests of Lebanon. It represents the interests of Iran, right? Let's not forget about that, because like I said, sometimes it's about the narratives, not the narratives of good guys and bad guys, let's say, right? No, well, it's just that here we have to be critical of everyone. And in that case, well, Hezbollah is unacceptable, right? It's a radical group that has been operating not only against Israel, but also, by the way, against Argentina and against multiple countries around the world, right? And it operates as a radical group, not as an army, right? It trains like an army, but it operates as a radical group. Well, that's basically what armies are for. If you're going to be invaded, that's what you have an army for, right? For Lebanon, if they're invaded, the army would handle it, right? But these groups attack Christians. They attack Muslims who aren't Shiites. And they don't, I mean, in central Lebanon, they don't want Hezbollah. In the south, in the north of Lebanon, they don't want them either. Even the Muslims themselves kick them out of there. Why? Because they view them as radicals and as part of another group, since they're Shiites, right? There are Sunnis in the north, Christians in the middle, and Shiites in the south. Well, and why are they there? Who encouraged them to be there? Iran. So, well, that's the issue. John says, all those who wage war are disgraceful, says Verderi. Cheers, Verderi. VP says they are drawing a parallel between a news report about an encyclical from Leo XIII and Leo XIV. When you can, look into it. Leonardo says it's great, regards. I mean, you know, there's the dumb side of war, right? But no, we can't say that everyone who wages war is the same, because it's like if someone suddenly tries to break into your house and wipe out you and your family, right? If you defend yourself, they'll claim you're just like the person who tried to harm you. That's not true. You were defending yourself. I didn't intend to hurt anyone, and I'm not saying that's true for Israel. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not the same, right? It's different in other wars, isn't it? If you're invaded, you have every right to defend yourself, right? If they're going to attack you, then you have the right to attack or defend yourself. Now, if you go too far, that's a different story, right? I mean, let's say a thief came to attack you, right? And you defend yourself from the thief, but you're not going to go after the thief's family or neighbor, which is what Israel does, right? I mean, Israel doesn't just defend itself from those who attack it, but goes and attacks the one who attacked and the neighbor and the other one and another. And that's where it's wrong, right? Totally wrong. I completely agree. It's unacceptable and can't happen. You defend yourself from the one who attacks you. That's where your options end, because if not, as Verderi rightly says in that sense, you can become the criminal that you're supposedly fighting against, right? So that's where the problem is, right? And that's exactly what's happening there in Israel, right? And that's why a lot of people in Israel don't like Netanyahu. They want him out. Actually, I think more people in Latin America like him than in Israel, right? Sometimes we have some really interesting narratives here, don't we? So, yeah, but I totally agree. I mean, there are limits, right? In any kind of defense, there are limits. In fact, that's the first thing they teach police officers. They say, look, these are your limits. You can, I mean, you're going to respond to, let's say, something unjust, whatever it is, but those are your limits, right? That doesn't happen in many countries, right? Here in Mexico, well, it would also depend on the state, right? But I mean, it depends on which state, because there are very well-trained police. There are cities with really good training on that subject. And there are others that honestly, but they're not usually, unlike, for example, what I see in the United States, where they're excessively violent. I mean, like, hey, let me get my document out here. You're not asking me for my document. Let me take it out. And bam. And how am I supposed to take it out? He can't take out his document because they're already shooting at him, right? There's an overreaction from the US police. It's very questionable, and without generalizing, but honestly, there are a lot of cases. Honestly, right? Honestly, so you have to be really careful about how you move, what you say, and what you don't say, because it's tough in that sense. Greetings. It's Panterita Eliseo. Good afternoon. How are you, Patri? Greetings. They say Iran massacred its own people. Yeah, well, that's terrible. I've mentioned it here many times, haven't I? And they keep doing it. So it's a huge problem inside Genial. It's intense. Great. Well, let's keep going. We'll keep talking. We'll keep chatting later. We'll continue with other reports. Have a great afternoon. We'll keep in touch. See you later.